All right, in today's video, we're going to explore the Atari ST Diagnostics cartridge. Let's see what we can learn from these three brand new to me Atari STs. Let's get to it. Greetings and welcome to the Power of Vintage. Before we start digging into these Atari STs here and testing out the diagnostic cartridge, I'd like to share a little background. I picked up these STs from John at RDKL Inc. He's a MacBook computer recycler that also works in the retro computing space. He's got a great YouTube channel that talks about topics ranging from his recycling business to right to repair to retro computing and other topics as well, selling on eBay and such. I'll put a link in the description below. It's actually quite interesting, and I've enjoyed working with him in many ways. Over the years, I've worked with him, I think it's probably 3 or 4 years now, or even longer. He's come across a number of Atari STs. He actually picked up a huge lot of Atari STs from the Tennessee Valley Authority a few years ago. I actually picked up a few of those at one point in time. But in general, what he typically does is he'll take those that are fully functional right out of the box and sells them onward. Those that are not, over the last few years, he's worked with me and I've picked them up from him, those that are not quite fully functional. The nice thing about Atari STs that aren't quite fully functional is generally that means that the power supply and or the floppy drive are having issues. For the most part, Atari STs are tanks. I've run across the issue here and there, the odd issue here and there, and I think we have one here today that will have one of those odd issues. But in general, most of them just need the PSU fixed and the floppy drive fixed, and then they're good to go. Each of these three Atari STs, I've done a simple smoke test on. No more, no less. Which is simply plugging into power, plugging it into a monitor, putting in the diagnostics cartridge, and flipping the switch. Simple as that. That's all we've done so far. We'll get through a few more tests over the next little bit, but specifically diving into what can the diagnostic cartridge tell us about these computers. Let's get to it. As I'm disassembling the first one, here we have a few bugs. Lovely, lovely bugs. Okay, this is the smoke tested working Atari 1040 ST board. I want to use this one first because it shows what a fully working Atari ST would look like using the diagnostic cartridge. I am going to use an external power supply that I know is working fully 100% so that we don't introduce any issues with a unknown power supply. Seems to be working, but I need to test it out fully before I feel confident in assuming that all the tests will work out appropriately. This is a newer board. How do I know it's a newer board? Two things. First off, we have 2 TOS ROMs here versus the 6. There are sockets, or there are pads to add 4 more sockets so that you can have 6, but there's only 2, and that typically means TOS 1.2 or 1.04 in the later machines. Over here, we also, the number 2 item is that we have pads for a socket to be soldered in, a PLCC socket for a blitter chip. So this version of the Atari 1040 ST could have a blitter chip added and function basically like a Mega ST. All right, simple as that. We'll leave that here. Here's our diagnostic cartridge. We'll plug this guy in. We'll plug in my test power supply. Right here, boom, there we go. I'm gonna want to plug in the keyboard as well as the floppy drive because the intent behind the diagnostics cartridge is I'd like to test out those 2 items as well. All right, let's get that here. Plug in the floppy drive here. This is a short button floppy drive. They're a bit more reliable from my experience. Now that could just be my specific experience, but I've worked on, I don't know, a few dozen, maybe 50 or more Atari STs. In that time, the short button floppies have been much more robust. One last thing to mention is I have a floppy disk here. I made it writable so that we can test the floppy drive as well. Just plug that guy in. And now we flip the power switch. Bada bing, bada bang. We are in the diagnostics ROM area. Diagnostics cartridge, rather. So let's zoom in a little bit on the screen here. So just a few things we can tell right from the get-go. Number 1, we can see that it's 1 megabyte of RAM. We can also see that is an NTSC running at 60 Hertz. Version 1.2 tells us the TOS version. 1.0 is the original version, 1.2 is Blitter TOS, 1.4 is Rainbow TOS. The latest that you would typically see with any of these Atari STs. What we're going to go through is we're going to go through a number of the tests here, not all of them, because some of them actually require a harness, a diagnostic harness. I'm not going to test those because, to be frank, the ports rarely fail. I've not really had any issues with them ever. So I'm not saying that they couldn't happen, because the tests do exist, but we're just going to test the items that are showing up here. All right, audio turned on. We'll start with the RAM test. And I'll fast forward through it because it fast forwards some of the tests that take time, just so that you don't have to wait around watching the screen. All right, testing the RAM, 1 megabyte RAM passed perfectly. Now we will test the OS-ROM. Perfect, ROM works fine. Moving on to color. Nice little rainbows here. Keyboard. This is a great one to test a keyboard to make sure all the keys are working. Everything seems to be working. Yep, return works. Working perfectly. That's awesome. You can also test the mouse. We're not testing the mouse right now at the time, just because I don't have it plugged in. All right, so press Shift, Escape to exit. Let's go to MIDI. Oh, no, not MIDI, serial port. Audio is next. We're going to skip MIDI and serial port because those are port tests that need the harness. Audio test. All right, audio worked. Timing. Perfect. Not the port. Next we go for the floppy disk. Let's do a quick test. Just testing out reading and writing from formatting from different tracks. Okay, this is the second 1040 ST. This one also passed the smoke test. What you can see here is this is clearly an older version of the Atari ST. We can tell for a couple of reasons. As I mentioned earlier, the newer one had 2 TOS ROM chips. We see here 6. These are likely TOS 1.0. What we have over here, we do not have a Blitter port or Blitter pads, but we do also have a different version of the floppy drive. You have the short button floppy versus the long button floppy. Long button floppies typically were found in the oldest versions of the Atari 1040 STs, STFs in general, 520 STFs, etc. All right, so what we're going to do now, plug in the diagnostics cartridge, plug in a known good power supply. We will also plug in the chunky floppy drive over here. A couple things to note, just when you're looking at these bigger floppy drives, you have different height standoffs, and this brass pin, whatever you want to call them, locator, is also shorter because the long button floppy drives are about 10 millimeters thicker. Excuse me for bumping the camera. Here, let's get the keyboard plugged in. So we're going to test out this computer here. Got a floppy disk here again as well to test out. And we will power on. I'm going to change the angle a little bit. Go a little lower. There we are, so you get a better view on the screen. And as you can see, we have 1 megabyte of RAM, 16 hertz, version 1.0. This is TOS 1.0, which was pretty clear from the age of the board. Let's zoom out just a smidge. All right, let's go through the test again. RAM first. And we passed, RAM's passed. Wonderful. OS-ROM, looking good. We'll test the color. Looks good again. Keyboard. Keys all work. Looks good. All right, skipping MIDI serial port. We'll test the audio. Audio sounds good. And timing. Good there. Let's go for floppy disk now. Quick test. All right, I hear this drive spinning. It doesn't do anything. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to power this one off, and we will attach the short floppy that worked, short button floppy drive that was working previously, and make sure that there's no issues with the board itself that's driving the floppy issue. Just swapping that floppy. Now, one of the things you'll also notice is that there's a difference in where the floppy ribbon cable actually connects on these floppies. Just interesting. It does affect how these fit in the different boards, so it makes it a little less interchangeable. You can still do it. They still work. You may have to adjust a few things as well. But for our purposes here, testing, it'll work just fine. And here we go. There we go. Oh, that's weird. Oh, it's looking good. It's fine. Floppy. There we go. Can you hear it testing? It sounds like it's working just fine, actually. All right, we're looking good here. Computer number 2 is working pretty fine, with the exception of the floppy drive. But other than that, we're looking good. All right, this is the last 1040 ST board here. This is the one that did not pass the smoke test. It is also the oldest in the bunch. How do I know it's the oldest in the bunch? Well, 1986, that's pretty darn early in the 1040 ST life. Additionally, if you look at the board number, this is a 523-01 Rev C. The previous one that we looked at was a Rev D, so it was a slightly updated version. This also has kind of a yellow-green tint to the board mask. The previous one we were looking at had a full green mask. Just some slight differences across the board. Also has the big height floppy drive. Let's plug in this guy here, the diagnostic cartridge. And plug in a known working power supply again. Plug in the keyboard so we can test the keyboard. There we go. And we have a white screen. That's not good. Let's see if we can learn anything more from this guy. Okay, I mentioned a trick with the diagnostic cartridge. What we need is the diagnostic cartridge. We need a working 1040 ST or Atari ST. You need to plug the diagnostic cart into the non-booting 1040 ST and then attach a null modem cable, female to female or male to female with an adapter, a gender changer. Plug it into the serial port on the back of your 1040 STs to connect the two. And then the last thing you need is this. This is a language disk. And actually, you really don't need the language disk. You just need the emulator, the terminal emulator, the VT52 terminal emulator accessory. But it's on the language disk and came with the language disk on the Atari STs right from the get-go. You power on the 1040 ST or the whichever version of ST you have that's working. You boot into TOS, and what we're going to do here first off is we're going to switch to medium resolution. Just because the terminal, we want to get the output in a decent format, and the medium resolution gets more text on the screen at the same time. And now we need to boot up the terminal emulator, the VT52 terminal emulator, right here under desk. And now we're booted up into this. And once we're here, then you turn power on to the computer that's not functioning or not booting, and you get output. And in this case, we see a RAM issue with that 1040 ST that's not booting. So I just wanted to show you what this one looks like on a non-functional Atari ST. And then we'll pick up the other one that does work and show how that one works as well. So as you can see here, I don't know exactly what this output means. Obviously there's an issue with the RAM. I've looked at what this means. This is, I believe, read bit, write bit. This is starting 15 to 0, so there's 16 bits here. This would be 15, 14, 13, and I believe that far right is an address line. I'll need to have to look it up, or we'll give it to the guy who's going to pick up and purchase the non-functional ST, and so he has a little bit of information he can work with. This is a nice little trick you can use when you have a working Atari ST and a non-working to help you troubleshoot. Now I want to show you what this looks like on a functional Atari ST when you connect them together. This is the working 1040 ST that had the non-functional floppy drive. What I then did is I pulled the floppy drive out of the computer that doesn't boot so we can test the floppy drive as well. We're not cleaning it yet. I'm not going to do any worry about that at the moment. We're just going to connect it in here. I have not plugged it into the serial port on the back. There we go. We'll set this guy down. I'm going to need the test floppy disk, not that one, a different one. Over here. Here we go. This guy here. Plug in the power and the diagnostic cartridge. But we wait to boot this one again. We're going to boot the fully functional one back into TOS. We will load up the VT52 emulator and then see what it looks like when we have what appears to be almost fully functioning Atari ST. There we go. Now we're booting up the other Atari ST. Ooh, we had an error, it looked like. Interesting. Well, what we can do is let's test a few things here. We can test the RAM. All right, we see the RAM passed. OS-ROM. It passed as well. You don't get a nice green screen. Testing the color probably won't work very well. I'd have to get the video output from the computer actually being tested. Let's test the keyboard, see if that works. Well, it's getting signals. That is weird. That was interesting. So testing that on the computer itself, the keyboard there. Interesting. All right, let's go to the floppy disk. I would like to try the floppy disk. And now we will do a quick test. Well, look at that. And it passed. So we have from the non-working ST, the non-booting ST, a fully functional, or at least semi-functional, that passed the floppy test, floppy drive. Great. There we go. What else can we run here? I think that's about it. Because otherwise we want to see what the video output looks like. Audio doesn't likely not work either. All right, very good. Interesting trick for the Atari ST Diagnostic ROM. The diagnostic cartridge is a great tool. not only for testing the computer's individual functions, but also with a serial connection, you can get some pretty useful information, even if the Atari being tested doesn't boot. I won't be making a video on fixing this computer here because it's going to a member of the Cincinnati Vintage Computer Club who wants to fix it himself, which is great. And I'll help him out if he needs some help at some point. I hope you enjoyed this simple video on the Atari Diagnostic Cartridge. Please, if you like this, please like and subscribe. And if you have any comments, put them in the comment field below. Have a great day, and thanks for watching. Bye.